Welcome to the Complexio podcast. In this special 3-part series, we take a deep dive into the technology behind Complexio, the intelligence layer that connects systems, people, and processes across the enterprise. In part 1, we explored how Complexio builds understanding. Part 2, how that understanding becomes intelligent action. And now, in the final episode, we look at what happens when those actions are connected and when automation becomes orchestration. We join Danny Lange, president of Complexio, and Sean Edmiston, chief scientist and co-founder, as they discuss how Complexio coordinates workflows, systems, and decisions into one adaptive network, creating a living enterprise that can see, respond, and evolve in real time. Yeah. I like to think of this almost as an employee leveling up within the organization. If we go back again, you have your first basis of working somewhere is understanding what work is happening within it. Then is being able to do that work yourself. The next level of kind of leadership development is learning how to delegate or orchestrate that with the people around you. As we move then, so we've understood the business now. We have learned what workflows are to automate. How do you then coordinate with all of the other systems, because that is something that is unique to Complexio as well. So one, how does orchestration differ from automation? And what makes it the next critical step in terms of enterprise AI and implementing AI into an enterprise?
So I touched on this earlier, but there's a key thing that happens with the Complexio system between where we are looking at individual automations, we're looking at individual things that we can help people with, and where the system can understand what is the outcome of that. What's the impact of the business? So it's not just about I'm doing this sales report. It's about I'm generating insights about the market. And so the Complexio system is able to make that leap, if you like, between activities and outcomes. And it's that understanding of outcomes that allows us then to look at all that diverse activity, those different systems, and manage that component you spoke about before. It's if you just look at it as a whole bunch of separate disjoint activities, you end up in this horrible mess of complexity where the systems are fighting against each other or conflicting with each other, and humans need to do the gluing. But once you have the system that understands what the point is, what is the point of this job that I'm doing? When you understand that, the system can use that understanding to resolve those complex, to assist in that complexity.
Again, I presume all of this is done automatically by the system. It's not a human deciding all this, which is different from before. Everything is done by the system. But how does it determine which model to use or which system? Again, you mentioned that it watches, that it learns what you do, but how does it adapt to when technology moves forward? Because maybe you introduce a new tool into the business.
It's sort of the same answer, that once we know what the outcome is, the specific system we use becomes somewhat secondary. What matters is, do we get the outcome we need? Now, the trick is that for any one particular activity, the business may have a lot of different outcomes. So, for instance, we look at, again, I'll use that example of that sales report. There might be the immediate outcome that's obvious to the person writing the report, where we're getting insights about that particular market segment. But there may be another outcome where the business then uses that report in some other way to combine it with other data to produce some other bit of insight for someone else. My point is that each individual may not be fully aware of all the outcomes that result from this particular activity, but that's the stuff that Complexio actually does understand, because we're looking at all the activities across the business. We can map this complex web between activities and outcomes. And once you know that, then the systems become secondary. We can change systems, we can update systems, we can use different systems because we have that understanding of outcomes.
Yeah, no, and it sounds like Complexio can add a lot of value to these tools that are third party. So for you, Danny, who has a large experience of all this, how does or why would Complexio be such an attractive thing for a technical partner to want to integrate with rather than maybe compete against them? And what value can it bring this third party tools?
You see, by analyzing all the interactions going on in an organization, that's what we do. But that's one thing. You need to turn that into action. And turning it into action means that you need to activate a lot of enterprise systems. You need to impact the real world, and that's where the partners come in. So our AI can generate the code that activates external systems, but we are not building these external systems. They may exist there, or some partners may bring them in, or partners may basically implement these systems. It could be robotic systems. It can be anything that has an impact into the real world. That's not our skill. That's not our expertise. Yeah. So that integration is super important. I think, for the more technically minded listener, it's all about the APIs. Modern AI systems are really, really good at automatically generating code against these APIs. The APIs are the things that connect to the real world and makes, a real change. And that is really where the partners, they come in. We don't do that.
One of the things that we have understood about Complexio is, there's a lot of other providers, particularly AI providers, who are approaching AI from the perspective that if I give the AI the problem, it will solve the problem for me. The thing that Complexio is in part trying to answer is, what is the problem? What is the problem we should be solving? And so one of the key distinctions with us is the understanding of the problem space. And so it's, we've often heard the old adage that, if you ask the problem correctly, you're halfway to solving it. And that's what Complexio does. Now, who actually solves the problem? How the problem gets solved, as Danny mentioned, AI, APIs, partners, other systems, they help Complexio give more value to businesses. And Complexio actually helps them become more powerful because they have a better frame problem to solve for businesses.
And whilst doing that, Complexio also sort of keeps the privacy and the security of the data and all of that's being fed out, or orchestrating also that part. Is that correct? Or how would you, if you now go into more of the, let's say, the trust part of having the system work with the tools that you have available to you in your enterprise?
Yeah, I think that's a common question we get asked a lot. And, the reality is that everyone is learning a lot more about how AI works. That question about trust is an absolute question that we take, very seriously at Complexio, but it's also a question that we're learning a lot about collectively as a society as everyone uses AI more and more. It is a very, very, very complex question, I think. From the Complexio side, we've touched on, transparency, we've touched on the explainability or the understandability of what it's doing, touched on the levels of control that you get around, the human on the loop, as Danny described it. And those are all elements that we at Complexio are implementing very proactively in order to build trust. But I think it's important to understand that, all AI is within a bigger context where everyone is working out how we do this as a society, as we all work with different AI systems with their different strengths and weaknesses. It's going to be a rich and interesting time as these tools get more powerful, as we use them in different ways.
I also want to say that we can instruct the AI to give us an audible trail to a great extent than we can often, trust employees to do that. Yeah. So we have to remember that AI systems are still mechanical systems, and they can produce a lot of data. They can be asked to explain how they got to a certain result, and that becomes traces that we actually can have, other AI systems look at and see, does this make sense? Are we violating any GDPR here? Is there anything that's out of the ordinary? Do we follow various regulations? So I also think at certain levels it opens up a whole new level of transparency that has been very difficult to maintain in very complex organizations with a lot of people involved, and I think that I want to see it sort of as a glass half full rather than half empty.
That's a great mindset to have as we move forward. I feel like the trust is probably one of the things that is a barrier for enterprises to wanting to get one AI into the company, but also this orchestration piece. But having had that now kind of calm down from what you both have said, what are some other barriers that they might face in getting orchestration, and what's the typical path to seeing some sort of measurable impact of what orchestration can do for them?
Well, I think one of, in the way you phrase that question, Celia, trust is a big part of it, but I actually suspect that a lot of times it's not so much about trust as it's about understanding. So it's I feel like I can't trust something if I don't understand it. And so we come back to that word understanding, and that, as we said before, is really Complexio's strengths. It's giving understanding about how the business works. As Danny just said, part of the challenge is that even today, we can't really understand exactly how each person does their job. If we're looking at a team of 5 people, they will all do things a little bit different. We'll have only a limited understanding about the specifics of how they're getting that job done. So Complexio gets into that space. We understand that space. We build this understanding, this richness of understanding of what's going on. And that's what then leads to the trust, because now we no longer have to trust what someone thinks they spent all their time on. We no longer have to trust what people think are the bottlenecks in their job, but we can get understanding and insight about it.
Yeah. So that for me makes me also think of, we've talked a lot about how we rely on sort of old methods of understanding, which then implies having humans or experts come in and look at the process that we're doing. And that maybe this then moves us away from that. But I can also see an opportunity for these businesses that are consultants, that they get a compliment from the way that Complexio works, in that they get that rich understanding quicker of the company. So how can you see that consultants can kind of be brought into this rather than excluded?
Absolutely. So we've talked about our automated automation engine. And the way I see that is that's helping, that's streamlining and facilitating and improving the way things work today. But that automated automations engine doesn't come up with radical new ways of working tomorrow. And there's huge opportunities in that space. As we look and understand this network of interconnected systems in a business, of databases and front ends and different tools that people are using, as we understand that whole web in more detail, we understand the connection between individuals and individual activities and the outcomes that people are achieving, and we understand the capabilities of some of these new AI tools that Danny's referred to. The potential to actually radically change how businesses work it is massive. Now, that's not going to happen by this little $1 problem, this automated automation engine. That's going to happen by bigger changes. So for me, that's where I see the role of those people becoming, how do we then do transformational changes within businesses?
Yeah, I think the big management consultancies would love to get their hands on Complexio's technology. I think that they have, for a couple of decades, lived from bringing very highly educated and trained consultants into organizations and interview everybody and produce long reports and recommendations. I think that what we are creating here, would enable them to understand organizations much faster. And it could be a very meaningful tool for them to use to do their job better and more efficiently.
Absolutely. And when those transformational outcomes lead to significant material businesses for benefits, Complexio will have the understanding of that. So it will no longer be a case of, well, the consultant did this report and did it make a difference? Maybe it did, maybe it not. But it will help them understand the business, and it'll actually help them demonstrate that what they did, the transformational change they introduced, actually made material impact.
Yeah, which is great news for everyone. And is that we are not in the business of removing humans from work, right? We are creating new opportunities. There's new ways of working, which we've hinted at throughout this conversation. when all of the pieces come together, understanding, action, and orchestration, and also this layer of trust based on understanding of what is being done, what, shall we say, new form of intelligence does that create inside of an enterprise? How does that change the enterprise?
I think it changes the way that enterprise operate. A year or two ago, I was asked to give a keynote, and I was given the title of the keynote, which is AI going to mean that the CEO is going to lose their jobs? And I think quite the opposite. I think we're all going to become sort of CEOs. I think that within an organization, the employees are going to be the bosses of the AI. AI is going to increasingly do the work. But again, we're the ones who judge whether it's the right work, whether we want it to be done this way. And we're going to instruct the AI, and that's going to be the primary roles of employees going forward, is to actually have much more impactful roles rather than, again, sitting and, copying numbers in spreadsheets.
So is it kind of fair to say then, Danny, that we're moving from predictive AI to adaptive AI?
Yes, we are going to have much more organic systems, to deal with in organizations. It's, predictive AI has been ruling the world for the last 20 years. And it's the technology behind, that's basically underneath the surface of Amazon and Uber and Netflix and Facebook, etc. That's sort of that is a very successful use of AI, but we are really in a disruption now. We're really in a change where AI becomes an more of an adaptive and an interactive player that humans dynamically interact with, and we're gonna, I predict that we're gonna see significant changes in the way that organizations are run.
One of the original sort of inspirations behind Complexio was this thought that, as humans, we've spent the last 50 or more years being trained how to use computers. As a user, I get trained, what box to copy what number into to get what result. And I have to adapt my work to fit in with the computer. And one of the things I used to taught people early in, Complexio's life is it's about time the computer started adapting to how we work. And that to me is what I see, that in some sense it should be becoming less about the technology. It's more about the job that needs to get done. It's more about the person who needs to do it. It's more about what makes sense to them, not what makes sense to the enterprise software architect or the systems integrator or whoever it may be that's doing that job. So I think that, to me, when I look into the future, it's becomes less and less about the technology, more and more about, the person and the job and the value.
Yeah, and following on that thought of going years ahead now, what will distinguish a company that adopts this, so shall we call it, like, intelligence layer that Complexio has, from those that still treat it as individual tools?
Look, it's sometimes, I think, people sometimes say that the impact of technology within 12 months, it will be a bit less than what we expect, but in 5 years be a lot more than what we expect. So I actually think it's quite dangerous to try and predict out that far, because we are going to see some big transformations. But one of the things I would hope is that, when we look at everyone doing a job in business, one of the biggest frustrations, and I would argue one of the biggest sources of inefficiencies that happens, is when people are doing jobs without understanding why. People get asked to just do this job, do this job, do this job, and they don't fully understand why. The Complexio system that actually is able to explain to people in ways that make sense why they're doing that job. Help them with mundane, boring bits, explain to them the important value they're adding as part of that job. To me, that's a really cool potential future here, that it doesn't, and this doesn't really matter at whatever role you have in the organization, whether it be, a seemingly, small minor job or a CEO level job, but for everyone to be able to make that connection between whatever they do each day, whether it be updating a spreadsheet or doing a calculation or building a strategy or whatever they're doing, but to make a connection between that and the actual value and the actual impact on the business, and present that in ways that make sense to people. I think the possibility of a much more fulfilling work for a lot of people is very real.
Looking ahead, the key word is outcomes. Sean mentioned it several times. It is really a focus on outcomes because the AI systems are going to help us get there, but they will not be able to, they are not able to understand the outcome. That's our job, to define those outcomes that we're looking for.
So kind of paradoxically, the more technology we bring, the more humanity we unleash inside of our businesses by the sounds of it.
That's the vision.
Wonderful. Danny, Sean, thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been incredibly insightful and very hope-giving as well. So I am looking forward to seeing what Complexio accomplishes next. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Cecilia.
That concludes our 3-part series, Inside the Intelligence Layer. Across this series, we've seen how Complexio builds understanding, transforms it into intelligent automation, and orchestrates it across the enterprise. It's a glimpse into a future where AI doesn't just automate work. It connects it, creating a unified intelligence that drives progress through context, collaboration, and clarity. To explore more about Complexio, the intelligence layer for enterprise AI, visit complexio.com or find us on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening to Inside the Intelligence Layer.